Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint by Sing Shong. Chapter 272. Giant Story. Part 1. Archangel Uriel had appeared in the 73rd Demon Realm. In the latter half of the original novel, Uriel had descended directly in an incarnation body. However, now it was only the 25th scenario. The confused mutters of the demon kings and constellations could be heard. What ridiculous. The transparent shape of Uriel appeared behind Young Hee-won, who had closed her eyes. Along with a splendid aura, Uriel's long golden hair waved in the air. The balance of probability was leaning again. The completely out of equilibrium balance was gradually being restored with the appearance of Uriel. No, now it felt like this side was becoming heavier. The even more surprising thing wasn't Uriel's power. All fights on the battlefield ceased. Surya watched with tense eyes while all the fighting constellations stopped. The descent of an archangel was also a tremendous event for the constellations. The first one to speak with a demon king with an L's face who was holding a burning sword. "Archangel! You dare appear here?" I knew who he was. Maker of discord. The demon king of the 63rd demon realm, Andras. He had cursed Han Soo-young, who once killed his subordinate. Then the demon king beside him also opened his mouth. Do you want to be a corpse, Archangel?" A skeleton wearing a crown and green armor. The monarch who was a philosopher about corpses. He was the demon king of the 54th demon realm, Murmur. They might be lower-ranked demon kings, but they were both stronger than me. Even so, there was a strange feeling in the expressions of these two strong existences. It was fear. After her descent, Uriel slowly opened her eyes. Her stunning emerald eyes took in the world, and the color of the world changed. I felt like my heart was frozen, despite not even making eye contact with her. The constellation demon-like Judge of Fire is looking at the 73rd demon realm. The archangel's gaze implied destruction. It was a gaze that looked at the last mountain of the world for the sake of purifying the world. The 73rd demon realm trembled at her gaze. Hasn't it been a while? The two demon kings took a few steps back. Young Hee-won's mouth curved subtly. Didn't I previously tell you not to carry that blade before me? I'm annoyed because of the overlapping characteristics. At the words, Andras slightly lowered the burning sword. Andras' eyes blinked rapidly and Murmur's skeletal jaw shook violently. It was Murmur who stepped forward first. "Foolish Archangel. Do you know what your action means? Or, has Eden decided to intervene in the selection?" "I came on my own." I was reminded of Uriel's setting. I had forgotten due to Uriel's kindness towards me, but she was one of the most fearsome archangels of Eden. The demon-like Judge of Fire. She was crueler than any archangel and slaughtered the most demons. She raised her hand towards the air and a white flame sword appeared. In front of her sword, all flames extinguished like a tribute. It was the sword containing the flames of hell. This was Uriel's star relic. The moment she pulled out her sword, the demon kings made an urgent expression. "Did you forget the agreement? Eat. Like you." "What?" Hit. The filtering. The archangels of Eden had their own filtering in order to preserve the dignity of their nebula. Then Uriel glanced at me. "Kim Dokja? Did I look too nervous?" Uriel smiled awkwardly at me. Hello?" It was an embarrassing and awkward greeting compared to her former appearance. Many constellations are speechless. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is pointing out that it doesn't match. The demon kings, who had just been threatened, watched with an absurd expression. I regained my senses and bowed. "It has been a while, Uriel." "Yes." Uriel laughed. "You are loved by an archangel. You have acquired a new story. The story person who is loved by an archangel has been acquired." Maybe she thought I was afraid and bombarded me with indirect messages filled with caring. Frankly, I was a bit impressed. There were a few constellations who favored me so far. Even so, there was no one who helped me as much as Uriel. I didn't do anything for her. I was always the one on the receiving end. Even so, Uriel came here today for me. Uriel raised Young Heewan's arms and exclaimed triumphantly. Don't worry, Kim Dokja. I'll kill them all for you. I knew this was a performance. This was the demon world. It was obvious that something would happen if an archangel exerted their power here. Nevertheless, for Uriel to say so. Uriel? Qua? Wait a minute. Uriel. Hell flames rose from Uriel's sword and continuously soared towards the sky. This was the true hell flames ignition. It was the real power of Uriel that could turn the world into a sea of flames with one blow. The archangel is crazy. Run away. Completely crazy. The freaked out constellation started to flee. I didn't think Uriel would exert her real power. The hiding Dokgak finally appeared. Wait a minute. Archangel, please calm down. His cunning face was flushed. The scenario was delayed until the announcement of the winner, and now. Uriel spoke like she had read my mind. Why yes? Scenario. Dakibi, CK, guys. Uriel had a really angry expression. The sky of the demon world was howling from her rage. The moment that the archangel's sword was going to touch the ground. The demon king, immeasurable austerity, is furious. The black magic power in the sky was raging wildly. The demon king, ruler of the East Hell, is staring at the archangel. The demon king, devil of principles, is raising his status. The demon king, black mane lion, is heading towards Eden. The fearsome and highly ranked demon kings appeared one by one in the channel. Damn it, there was going to be a war in the demon world. However, the demon kings weren't the only ones who appeared. The constellation Guardian of Youths and Travel has entered the channel. The constellation Lily Pin of Aquarius has entered the channel. The constellation Commander of the Red Cosmos has entered the channel. The highest level constellations who could make everyone nervous just by appearing. The major constellations of Eden entered the channel, and the volume of the channel grew drastically. Bayou trembled like it was painful. The constellation Scribe of Heaven is watching the demon-like Judge of Fire with severe eyes. Uriel's sword trembled. It felt like time had frozen. All the demon kings and archangels were concentrating on Uriel's sword. The future of the demon world and Eden depended on the direction of this sword. The demon kings of the demon world and the archangels of Eden have opened an emergency meeting. All this time, all demon kings and archangels in the scenario will be urgently summoned. There was the sound of a great probability moving, and Uriel's sword disappeared in the air. Young Heewan's body shook as the energy of the archangel left the demon world. Uriel glanced at me with a light smile. I wanted to help you until the end. In hindsight, I realized Uriel's intentions. This can't be. It wasn't just Uriel who disappeared. The demon kings who descended slowly disappeared in the sparks of probability. Uriel sacrificed herself to tie up the hands and feet of all the demon kings here. It is amazing. Chiok Jungyang muttered to himself with admiration. A majestic archangel making such a great sacrifice for you. I could easily predict the great punishment Uriel would face. An archangel who broke the convention of the good-evil war with her own will. She would probably receive harsh sanctions from Eden. Please win, Kim Dokja. I reached out to the disappearing Uriel, but she had already scattered into ashes. I quickly embraced the fallen Young Heewan. Young Heewan had just taken on Uriel's status and fell asleep with an exhausted face. I raised my head as I felt pressure from the sky and saw Surya watching everything. My judgment was wrong. I didn't think you were a constellation who could call an archangel here. Thanks to Uriel, there was no need to worry about the participation of the demon kings. However, there was something worse. A more serious light appeared in the eyes of the silent Surya. The same was true for King Oedipus and Manu, who were guarding the left and right of Surya. From now on, I will be sincere. Surya's new energy shot through the sky. The surrounding air changed and a huge wind pressure hit the area. After a while, what is that? My party members approached me one by one. The first one to speak was the weary Jang Haeung. When will this hell end? What the hell is that? Beyond the radiant sun, something was flying through the distant universe. Something was ripping through the air. It was like the sound of meteorites colliding. I looked closely, and a huge carriage was flying towards this place. Whenever the gigantic golden mare accelerated, the entire demon world shook like it was going to burst. A carriage? Could this thing be called a carriage? No, should it be called a locomotive? No words fit. The only thing certain was that the object that was a size that couldn't be understood with common sense was heading towards this direction. It would be a disaster for this world. Yusanga opened her mouth. Surya's chariot. According to legend, it is over 130,000 kilometers in length. 130,000? Does that make sense? Jang Haeung asked, and Yusanga shook her head. That's why it's a myth. The Indian myths claimed that giant turtles and elephants held up the earth. Thus, it wasn't strange if a locomotive of such a huge scale appeared. The problem was that we had to deal with that disaster. You have watched a part of the giant story, Vedas. Your story comprehension has increased. Was this the sincerity mentioned by Surya? I admired the status that caused chills to go through my body. I felt overwhelming despair just because it approached this side. I had only watched some of it, but this strength was different from an ordinary story. It was the reason why I had to get a giant story. Shit, run. Some constellations were already hiding from the rushing carriage. There were no constellations who would be safe after being hit by it. Cheok Jungyang muttered, things are really difficult. He seems to truly want to destroy this world. Are you scared? No, it's interesting. Cheok Jungyang laughed like he was truly having fun. The moment I tried to say something to my party members, someone stood beside me. It wasn't Cheok Jungyang or a constellation. You woke up? I looked over and saw Yu Jonghyuk standing up with the black demon sword. The character Yu Jonghyuk has used recovery LV10. Yu Jonghyuk's body had finally healed to the point where he could use recovery. The last of Yu Jonghyuk's vitality was burning on the dark sword. The mouth and vocal cords were still slow to recover, so Yu Jonghyuk didn't speak. Instead, I heard Yu Jonghyuk's thoughts through Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. Kim Dokja. Yes. Perhaps this would be the last fight in the demon world. The 73rd demon realm is focused on your choice. This time, I couldn't guarantee anything. Someone here could die. Maybe Yu Jonghyuk and I would die. Nevertheless, I declared, let's go. Yusanga and Lee Hyunsung nodded while Shin Yusung climbed onto the Chimera Dragon. Lee Jaihai looked at the sky from the moat and also nodded. There were no longer any constellations to help us. Now there were only humans here. This didn't mean it was a fight with no chance of winning. It was because I had already bought enough time, thanks to Uriel. The 73rd demon realm is responding to your choice. Perhaps it was a mistake for Surya to show his sincerity. In the face of the coming calamity, we wouldn't be the only ones who would come to an end. Just like first Murim in the destruction scenario, the 73rd demon realm approached the time of choice. The giant story of the 73rd demon realm is germinating. There was no world that wanted its master to be the one that destroyed itself. The 73rd demon realm has chosen its master. The perplexed Akibis and constellations let out exclamations at this message. However, I didn't hear any of them. It was because now I wasn't listening to the story, I was talking to the story. Your giant story has started talking. Chapter 273. Giant Story. Part 2. Surya floated in the air and looked down at the ground with a complicated gaze. The 73rd demon realm was surrounded by a bright light as sentences were woven into one being. It was the sight of the world choosing its master, before the enormous destruction flying from the universe. Surya muttered, "It is only the 25th scenario, yet a giant story has been obtained. There is such a thing in the star stream." Surya had lived for a long time, but he couldn't come up with a name. There was Hercules of Olympus, but he was a half-god, not a pure human. King Oedipus exclaimed, "Surya, it's fine. It is still germinating, and you can crush it." The giant story was unlike any other story. It was the sum total of numerous tales, and a story that guaranteed a tremendous probability by itself. However, it might be a giant story, but it was only beginning. The demon king of salvation was just a superficial being who fortunately rose to the status of a constellation. Nevertheless, why couldn't Surya easily feel confident? "Surya, what's wrong with you? Let's finish it." All giant stories were the beginning of the end. The story that headed towards the end of this epic scenario. Even so, getting a giant story didn't mean that everyone would get the qualification of the end. Some giant stories were connected with, but others didn't go near the vicinity of before disappearing. "Surya, it is because you can't get the qualification of the end." He didn't forget Asmodeus' words. In his tranquil rage, a message entered Surya's ears. "A new scenario has been given to you. You will be the destruction of the 73rd demon realm." Surya frowned at the undesirable role assignment. "The star stream. What do you want from this old body?" He lost one of his 12 sons to Cheok Jungyong and wasted a great deal of energy against Asmodeus. In addition, he had exhausted most of the probability given to him. "Surya, you don't have to go by the book. I have an idea. There is a way to subdue them without fighting." Surya frowned. "Oedipus, are you going to use a despicable trick again? Against humans? That isn't it. I am the supreme god of light, Surya." The great sentences of Vedas were shining in Surya's halo. "Even if I can't use my full strength, I will never lose to humans." Oedipus shut his mouth in front of the overwhelming status. Surya raised his hand, and the paused carriage started the violent charge again. The locomotive made a deafening sound as it crashed through the atmosphere. Red and blue flames sparked from the head. The first one to speak was Yu Jonghyuk. "It doesn't seem like 135,000 kilometers. If a train of that size really appeared, it would seem like a giant planet was falling." Cheok Jungyong told me, his words are correct. "It is around 30 kilometers long. Still, that is enough to destroy this place." "Demon King of Salvation, what happened to the giant story?" "It has just started talking. The sentences are slow to gather." The giant story of the 73rd demon realm was safely obtained, but things weren't over just by receiving it. It needs more time to work properly. We have to slow down the train. Perhaps this train was all that the present Surya could mobilize. There was a chance for us if we managed to block that train. I looked back and saw Cheok Jungyong already prepared to jump forward. "Please, Goryo's first sword. Believe in me." Cheok Jungyong shot forward towards the sky. Yu Jonghyuk and I chased after him, and the rest of the group followed on Shin Yusung's chimera dragon. The thunder-eating bird and mysterious bird of the Nile flew to interfere with us, but the brash swamp predator bit at their wings. "Leave these guys to me." The closer we got to the head of the train, the more I realized the enormous scale of Vedas. The width of the head of the train was a few hundreds meters, and it was at the level of an outer god. "Hey up!" Cheok Jungyong shouted and showed his three-sword style. Two-sword style, two-sword mountain chop. Cheok Jungyong's slash, that cut through a mountain, hit the train. The head of the train met Cheok Jungyong's status and let out a strange sound. It deviated from its course, but the speed of the train didn't slow. In the formidable heat, it was Cheok Jungyong's sword slash that was melted away. However, Cheok Jungyong didn't stop. Three-sword style, three-sword ocean chop. A strike that cut the sea. It felt like there was a tsunami, and the speed of the train was reduced to a slight degree. The biggest achievement was the explosion to the lead car, creating an internal access point. It will be easier to move inside. I will slow it down from outside. Chiak Jungyang emitted a strong magic power from the head of the train. Still, it was hard for Chiak Jungyang to deal with an object of this speed alone. I'll help you, Ajashi. Shin Yusung's chimera dragon moved to the head of the train with Chiak Jungyang. The second-grade monster, the chimera dragon, created intense wind pressure and the speed of the train was further reduced. Chiak Jungyang cried out, I have somehow bought 20 minutes. Surya will be in the car at the end. Knock him down and this story will disappear. Go. We nodded and entered the interior of the train. The train looked like a subway built for a giant. We adapted to the inertia to a certain extent and pressed the button to go to the next compartment of the train. The door won't open. This train is only available to the constellations of Vedas. Yu Zhonghyuk didn't hesitate to activate the breaking the sky swordsmanship and hit the door. There was a dent in the door, but it didn't open. Amazing. Unlike Chiak Jungyang's expectations, the train's internal strength was formidable. It wouldn't be hard to break if Yu Zhonghyuk and I were in good shape, but the train was 30 kilometers long. In other words, we had to consider the distribution of power. Then the first sentence of the giant story was heard. The story started on the subway. Sparks surged and my stories were released into the air. I felt waves surging from a distant place. It was the sign of a very old story. I looked back and the party members seemed to be feeling something similar. The first story of your giant story has begun. Yu Zhonghyuk, Li Hyunsung and Yu Senga looked at me. The sparks that flowed like the tide was transforming the scenery around us. Li Hyunsung murmured with astonishment, this. Every giant story was a different story. Some involved the birth of a hero, while others told the birth of a world. Our story wasn't a hero's biography or a creation story. This story was our survival record. The number 3807 was on the back door of the train. I looked around and sighed. It is the subway. All stories invoked stage transformation when the place or person involved in the story collided. The 3807 car of the 3434 Bulgwang train. It was where Yu Senga and Li Hyunsung became my colleagues and where I met Yu Zhonghyuk. All of our stories started here. Li Hyunsung's fists were clenched as he opened his mouth with a tense expression. I remember that time. It isn't a good memory but... Yu Senga was watching me with a faint smile. Even so, I often think about it. It wasn't a memory I could happily recall. Someone's death and the hell of an absurd scenario. It wasn't a memory I could feel nostalgic about, but it was a history that we survived. Li Hyunsung smiled and placed his hand on the door. I think I can do it somehow. There was a soldier who wanted to be righteous. Eventually, everything became a story. It was hard, sad, and even something I wanted to forget. After all, everything was a story. Hey op. I didn't expect it would be comforting for us now. There was only one thing we could know. The constellation prisoner of the golden headband is watching your party. The constellation secretive plotter is listening to your story. In a world where sadness and joy were useless, we had to continue the story. The door, which didn't open to Yu Zhonghyuk's breaking the sky swordsmanship, started to open at Li Hyunsung's power. The giant story dwelling in Li Hyunsung's body started exerting its strength. The character Li Hyunsung has used the stigma Great Mountain Push LV10. When I thought about it, Li Hyunsung was the one who opened the door to escape. Go. Quickly. Li Hyunsung opened the gap and our party ran. Nevertheless, it was only one door and the train was still long. This time, it was Yu Zhonghyuk who came forward. I will break through next. I suddenly remembered a long time ago. The regressor who annihilated the other incarnations on the train and rushed forward like a tank was now in front of me. There was the strongest and loneliest man in the world. Yu Zhonghyuk put away his sword and concentrated all his magic power on his fist. Then he slammed his bare fist into the door. The door of the car, which was unharmed before the sword, was torn apart by his bare hands. This was the effect of stage transformation. It was unfortunate for Surya that his main story was this train. Dr. SSI. I don't think we need to break this car. Yusenga figured something out and yelled. Just like when I found the opening device, Yusenga found a way to open the car door without force. There was also a woman who hid herself for others. One car, another car. We kept moving forward. It was as if we were living history again. There was the sound of hammering from the outside of the train. Li Jihai was also struggling to reduce the speed of the train. The sword demon wounded after losing a relationship was met. The chimera dragon's roar was heard. In my arms, Baya raised her head and looked at the head of the train. To be exact, it was in Shin Yusung's direction. A child born in the gap between past and future wept. The next moment, the chimera dragon let out a formidable roar. The train tilted and the speed of the train was further reduced. I didn't know, but I thought Bayu might have given something to Shin Yusung here. We aren't halfway yet. We have to hurry. As Yu Zhonghyuk stated, we were still far away from the end of the train. More than 10 minutes had already passed. The speed might be reduced, but the industrial complex would be completely destroyed at this pace. To make matters worse, we faced a challenge when we reached the next car. A ray of light shot towards us. Li Hyunsung blocked it for me and held his shoulder. You can't go any further. Founder of humanity, Manu, and several other constellations were waiting there. Yu Zhonghyuk directly used breaking the sky swordsmanship against them, but it wasn't enough to break through the constellations on the defense. They knew they had to drag out time here. I was going to use the magic power I had saved when the ceiling of the train started to be squeezed. Something was destroying the train with an immense magic power from outside. What's going on? It was at least a narrative-grade constellation. They couldn't destroy the shell of the train unless they had the power to match Chiak Jenyang. Move. Then Jang Haeung's voice was heard outside the train. Kim Dokja. They came. The next moment, the entire ceiling was torn off and two beings appeared with Jang Haeung. The constellation of a small planet is looking at you. It was a small person filled with a brilliant blue-white energy and a huge woman releasing a blue aura. Funnily enough, my vision seemed to blur for a moment. Where is my disciple? There was the strongest small person in the world as a teacher. It seems that we're a bit late. The world of the strongest giant was saved. They were existences with enough power as Chiak Jenyang who could help us. Transcendent. In front of Manu, the two transcendents of First Murim descended. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint, Namgung Minyoung. The Paradox Baekcheung, Kyrios Rodgrain. Namgung Minyoung glanced at us and said, "Do it properly until the end. Otherwise, I'll kick your ass." Kyrios stared at me and declared, "You will pay the price for lying to me. I won't allow your death until then." Kyrios and the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint fired their skills at the door to the next car. The energy of Breaking the Sky Swordsmanship and electrification combined and caused a formidable wind pressure to rise. The constellations shrank back at their momentum. The fearsome waves of magic power advanced and crushed the doors blocking our way. It was a straight road, prepared for a short period of time. Yu Zhonghyuk met my gaze, and we started running. The exclusive skill, Way of the Wind LV11+1, is activated. Way of the Wind and Red Phoenix Shuimpa assisted each other as we ran. We soon reached the last car of the train. Finally, there was a man who knew the ending of all these worlds. This story didn't exist in Ways of Survival. It was a story that never existed before. It was a story that would lead me to the ending I wanted. I opened the last door of the train. Chapter 274. Giant Story. Part 3. Surya was beyond the last door. Yu Zhonghyuk's fist struck the door and broke it down, revealing a pierced skyline with strong winds. The last train car with Surya was cut apart, as if it had been ripped out by something. You came sooner than expected. Surya stared at the sky and spoke with his back to us. A square space was visible beyond the cut train. The light of the divine being stretched out into the darkness. It was like a palm gathering sand on a vast beach. I deliberately spoke in a polite tone, "Surya, let's stop here." The divine light that couldn't touch the providence of the universe looked at me. Surya's eyes stared at me. They seemed to be saying that even if they didn't understand the star stream, there was no way they couldn't read everything about me. A man who knows the ending of all the worlds, it is a really wild story. Perhaps Surya had heard the sentence of my giant story. Before I could answer, King Oedipus stood by Surya's side and replied, "It is just a metaphor. A pun." It was rather fortunate if he thought so. I felt a bit uncomfortable since the story contents came directly from me. The constellation mass production maker is questioning your sentences. The constellation god of wine and ecstasy is wondering about your giant story. The constellation prisoner of the golden headband is telling him to be nervous. The constellation maritime war god is forming clenched fists. The constellation secretive plotter is looking at you. Surya's gaze towards me was changing. I realized that no matter what I said, I couldn't stop him. "Come on, child. The time given to you is 10 minutes. Surya's forearms were raised in a fighting posture. His size gradually became bigger as he opened up his status. He didn't use any weapons. Surya intended to exclude me simply using the pure power of stories. 10 minutes later, this carriage will collide with the demon world. There was no more need to delay, and Yu Jongyuk rushed in first. A blue aura reminiscent of the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint emerged from Yu Jongyuk's body. The Breaking the Sky swordsmanship was spreading its light. I wasn't the only one affected by the giant story. Yu Jongyuk also had a stake in this story. Despite his injured body, Yu Jongyuk was now able to exert a power equivalent to a constellation. There was the sound of a blade and a pole colliding. It wasn't Surya who received Yu Jongyuk's attack. Who? King Oedipus let out a pained groan as he confronted Yu Jongyuk. Quack. Oedipus squeezed out power from an overheated incarnation body, but he seemed to be having a hard time dealing with Yu Jongyuk. Kim Dokja. Along with Yu Jongyuk's cry, I leapt through Oedipus' defenses and headed to Surya. In the air of the train, the several times larger Surya greeted me. The exclusive skill Electrification LV12+2 has been activated. I was surrounded with the light of electrification and a blue-white energy struck Surya's chest. The other time, Surya stopped my electrification with one fist. However, this time was different. Surya's skin was touched by the blue-white energy and started burning. This was from a slight blow. Surya's eyebrows twitched with surprise. I flew through the air and collided with Surya's fists. The shock shook my heart, but I endured it. The power of the giant story is working for you. The world's sentences were swirling around me. The power allowed me to compete with the mighty narrative-grade constellation. This was a great story, but Surya was still alive. I said it before. You can't win with the skills you have stolen. Maybe it was as Surya stated. I always struggled with the skills of others. This isn't something that I stole from others. I read it. Read? As Persephone told me, an existence was a story. Memories of sentences that had been read for many years. Everything that I had read and seen now became me. The exclusive skill, Fourth Wall, is strongly activated. On the fourth wall, the sentences of the giant story emerged. This is the story of a reader. I ran towards Surya. In the trail of my run was the countless hours I spent alone reading. It was an ordinary life. I sat alone in a dark room and read Ways of Survival. On the bus after my part-time job was over, in the army, in the classroom, on the subway home from work. At the same time, it is the story of Dokja. I lived in that world alone. I entered the mind of countless characters and became different beings again and again. Only this story. Therefore, I was a regressor who had never regressed. The exclusive skill Way of the Wind LV11+1 is activated. A returnee who had never returned. The number 3 bookmark has been activated. The exclusive skill Beast King Sensitivity LV10 +1 has been activated. Maybe I was a reincarnator. Surya's face slightly distorted as he was confronted with my status. Every time our statuses clashes, I could feel our bodies being destroyed. Surya was also pulling out all the power he could. This is too much. It is ridiculously insufficient to get the qualification of the end. I shook my head. It seems like you are mistaken about something. It isn't only the giant stories that can reach the end. Maybe Surya wouldn't understand. I had only received enlightenment after learning from Yu Jonghyuk's myriad failures. Surya's face hardened and he concentrated his strength into his 4 arms. Perhaps this would be Surya's last attack. I didn't back down and stood up to him using the power of electrification. The glare of the sun that melted everything was fired towards me. The blue-white light couldn't overcome the high temperature and was pushed little by little. I had just taken a step or 2 back when a rough and solitary story wrapped around me from behind. It wasn't necessary to see whose story it was. The sparks between Surya and I became more intense. Slowly, the pushing stopped. The constellation Master of Steel is looking at you. The constellation Master of the Skywalk is looking at you. Li Hyansung and Yu Sanga. There was also Young Heewan's story. The history of all those who struggled to survive was nestled inside me. The woman who woke up from a long crouch and laughed while holding a sword to destroy evil. They weren't here, but there were others who shared our history. The boy who lost his mother and held the insect in his hand, cried. The man who built the castle roared for the family that wouldn't come back. Lee Gilyung and Gong Pildu. The woman who built up the truth by lying gladly became his shadow. There was also Han Soo-young. The exclusive attribute Scenario Interpreter is activated. Everything I lived made their way into the story. Surya's incarnation body was right in front of me. Surya's weakness was something that couldn't be read with the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare's stigma. Yet strangely, at this moment I knew where to stab Surya. The exclusive skill Reading Comprehension is activated. Unbroken faith shone brightly and an intense white light pierced Surya's chest. There was the sound of something breaking as I poured out all my magic power before flying through the sky. Among the fragments of the story that poured through the air like a fountain, the collapsed Surya could be seen. Surya, the supreme god of light. Oedipus shouted and the situation started falling apart. Meteorites were oxidized in the atmosphere and Surya's train collapsed. I was falling towards the ground. Kim Dokja. Yu Jonghyuk flew like the wind and grabbed me while the Chimera Dragon picked up my falling companions. It was truly a narrow escape. A few fragments of the last car left a long trail as they fell towards the ground. The shattered debris wept. Fortunately, the industrial complex wasn't going to be hit. Shin Yusung was watching me from the head of the Chimera Dragon. A juicy. Joy could clearly be seen on the child's expression. The next moment, a voice was heard from the cloud of dust on the ground. Not yet. Not yet. It was King Oedipus. The miserable-looking existence shouted at us from among the fallen constellations. The demon king of salvation. I know that the succession of the giant story hasn't ended yet. If you give us the story, we will leave here. The game was already over, but he still hadn't given up. It was Yu Jonghyuk who replied on my behalf. Why should we? Yu Jonghyuk landed on the ground, dropped me down, and took out the black demon sword. Then King Oedipus spoke. Otherwise, your precious world will disappear. Do you want to talk about fate again? I know you don't have enough probability left in the demon world. What if it isn't the demon world? He flicked his fingers and a huge panel appeared in the air. It showed a blue planet that we knew well. Yu Jonghyuk frowned. It seems you've sold your pride as a constellation. Is this your last hurrah? At this point, it was impossible to destroy Earth even if all of Olympus probability was used. Yu Jonghyuk was aware of this and wasn't panicked at all. King Oedipus laughed. It's impossible to destroy Earth. But what about this? He flicked his fingers again and the screen changed. At this moment, the faces of Yoo Jong-hyuk and the party members hardened. The Korean peninsula was engulfed in flames. If I knew this, I would have gone to the demon world. Han Soo-young frowned as she gazed at Gyeonggi-do burning with red and blue flames. In fact, there was a reason why Han Soo-young didn't go to the demon world. You are currently cursed by the demon king Andras. Han Soo-young had been caught in Kim Dokja's plot and cursed by the demon king. Thanks to this, she would become the meal of the demon king as soon as she visited the area. Lee Gil-young stomped his feet beside her and shouted, "Won't everyone be with Dr. Hyung by now? I wish I was Shin Yu-sung." I guess so. However, that place will be harder than here. Han Soo-young felt the disaster coming through the flames and gulped. After Kim Dokja's group left for the personal scenario, the disaster scenario had come to the Korean peninsula. The time limit for the disaster scenario is 30 minutes. The problem was the disaster that came this time were constellations. Damn Olympus. She didn't know what type of backdoor dealings they made with the Dakibis of the Bureau, but the constellations of Olympus had come as the disasters of this scenario. Due to the difficulty, the scenario would end after 30 minutes. In these 30 minutes, the Korean peninsula was likely to disappear from Earth. What are you going to do now? Gong Pildu asked while blowing out cigarette smoke. The reason the Gyeonggi-do area had lasted so far was thanks to Gong Pildu's armed fortress. Han Soo-young replied, "Just hold on a bit longer. There is a way. The opponents are the incarnation bodies of constellations. There are more than 5 of them. How are you going to win? You aren't Kim Dokja." Their auras showed they were great constellations. Perhaps they were ancient heroes or lesser gods of Olympus. There are only small people on this little land. Her head hurt from all the noise. Han Soo-young calmly pulled out a dark stone. Abyss stone. It was an item Kim Dokja told her to collect before they separated. Thanks to this item, she could send the other party members to the demon world despite lacking probability. She had used 3 so far and there were 6 remaining. The number was a bit lacking, but this was the only way. I didn't know I would use them catching bugs. As Lee Gil-young's insects protected the fortress and Gong Pildu's fortress continued firing, Han Soo-young started the descent ceremony by offering the Abyss Stone. It was just for a short time, but she could call in existence to balance this twisted scale. Sparks flew and the Abyss Stones started to disappear one by one as an offering. It was a fearsome presence who could only use a portion of their power through the 6 Abyss Stones. The sky of Gyeonggi-do turned dark and filled with thunder. A huge shadow was revealing itself behind Han Soo-young. Han Soo-young sighed lightly and slowly opened her eyes. Black Dragon. You can do whatever you like. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is grinning and revealing white teeth. Chapter 275. Giant Story. Part 4. The Olympians swept away Songnam in an instant and slowly narrowed the siege around Gong Pildu's fortress. Isn't the stage too small for us to come forward? The constellations thought it was disgraceful. It was natural. There were no constellations who could build up anything from this scenario. Amidst these unmotivated constellations, a constellation wearing a crown and holding an ancient spear and shield spoke. Stop complaining. Once this is over, Father says he will suggest our promotion to the 12 gods. Oedipus? Really? The expressions of the constellations changed due to the words of the blind king's heir. Promotion in the nebula meant their stakes in the giant stories were increased. Haha, can we reach 1 decimal place? The stakes in a giant story were one of the measures of a constellation's strength. More stakes meant more probability, which was a source of escaping from the constraints of many scenarios. Let's finish it and go back. The constellations finally started to advance to the armed fortress. It happened the moment their star relics were shining. The sky was covered by a dark dome and light disappeared from it. The great constellations approaching the armed fortress stopped at the appalling darkness. What? The lights in the area were turned off by the clouds that came. It wasn't just this area. The darkness covered the entire Korean peninsula. Even the sparks of probability were covered by the deep darkness. The blind king's heir stared up at the sky with bewildered eyes. Is it the queen of the underworld? The only nebula that could descend to the Korean peninsula today was Olympus. In addition, there were few constellations of Olympus who could use such a large amount of probability. One of the constellations emitted a faint light to reveal the surroundings, but it quickly disappeared. It was like a black hole that sucked out all the light. The anxious constellations shouted, "Your Majesty! If you have come, then please say it." One of the constellations suddenly gave a warning. Something is coming. A dark object was fired from the sky and pierced the chest of one constellation. Kiak. It was an object like a dragon's claw. The confused constellation coughed up blood and tried to pull out the claw, but the claw grew increasingly larger and soon burst through the constellation's body. The constellation let out a sound before becoming part of the darkness. The frightened constellations screamed, "Yua!" They heard the sound but couldn't avoid it. It meant this existence had a completely different status from them. The queen of the underworld wasn't this much. Run away. The blind king's heir discovered the situation and ordered a retreat. Then an enormous amount of sparks burst from the armed fortress. The intense light that the darkness couldn't swallow revealed the open door of the fortress leading to the dark city. There was a woman with a small body. The first one to discover her was the blind king's heir, who trembled. "Why are you?" The shadows of black flames were swirling around her body. The face of a little boy with red eyes underneath black hair flashed. The boy with one arm bandaged raised his hand, and the shadow of a dragon covered the sky. White fangs were bared. As the boy laughed, the darkness of the world breathed. Then the massacre began. King Oedipus couldn't hide his astonishment as he stared at the scene on the screen. The constellation Blind King's Heir has been removed from the scenario. The constellation Thebes Gatekeeper has been removed from the scenario. The shadow of a dragon was tearing up the fleeing constellations on the screen. Fortunately, Han Soo-young wasn't too late. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is letting out wild laughter. Ahahahahot. Han Soo-young had a bandage around one arm and half covered her face as she burst out laughing. She was really a match for the black dragon. She acted so well that I didn't know why she hated it so far. King Oedipus stared at me and exclaimed, "How come? Why is a candidate of the apocalypse?" Candidate of the apocalypse? Well, King Oedipus would have that type of information. The Abyssal Black Flame Dragon was one of the candidates of the apocalypse. Many constellations are astonished by your scheme. The constellation Dragon Lying Down is nodding. The constellation Secretive Plotter is feeling pure admiration. You have acquired a new story. The story Kill with a Borrowed Knife has been acquired. I watched Gyeonggi-do covered in darkness and licked my lips. Attracting the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon was a last resort. It could have brought about a bigger disaster. However, there was Han Soo-young and the promise made with the Black Dragon. Thus, he wouldn't destroy the Korean peninsula. Ku-ok. King Oedipus bowed his head and let out an unknown groan. We saw the unusual appearance, and Yu Jong-hyuk and I raised our swords at the same time. You. King Oedipus' son was among the constellations who suffered under the Black Dragon. There was the possibility that the enraged Oedipus wouldn't be able to control his emotions. I will kill you. As expected, the constellations who survived with Oedipus released their status at the same time. I had a giant story, but it wasn't enough power. The moment I was about to trigger electrification, something rose from the ground and caught Oedipus' neck. Cough. The huge Surya moved one of his four arms and held on to Oedipus' neck. King Oedipus stared at Surya with surprise. Why? Stop it. Surya's heavy status pressed down on the other constellation. Don't look so ugly anymore. I won't listen to the words of a dog who lost the fight. It can't end like this. The next moment, King Oedipus' body exploded. The brutally exploded body scattered into ashes in front of Surya's eyes. The movements of the constellation stiffened and they nervously stepped back. Despite the severe injuries, Surya still had the power to stand up alone. It was a phenomenal vitality. I quickly calculated the power of my remaining companions. If we hit Surya right now, it is our defeat. For a moment, I thought I heard wrong. However, the words had definitely emerged from Surya's mouth. I bit my lips as joy boiled from deep inside my heart. The great Lokapala had admitted defeat. The winner of the Demon King selection has been determined. There were screams from afar as the ensuing system messages came. They were the screams of the dukes defeated in the Demon King selection. One by one, the bodies of the constellations staring at us scattered. The scenario ended and the star stream started to recall the probability that they were allowed. Surya's body was also disappearing. I opened my mouth before Surya's body completely disappeared. I wanted to ask, why did he suddenly change his mind? The Demon King of Salvation. However, I shut my mouth the moment I saw Surya's eyes. In retrospect, Surya wasn't an ordinary constellation. He was one of the great Lokapala. It was rather strange that such a constellation would use cowardly tricks against us. Perhaps this selection had dealt a significant blow to his reputation and pride. Surya slowly blinked and asked, "Did you get the qualification of the end?" "I'll probably get it." "And you also?" Surya's eyes shone terribly, as if he was dismissing the trivial comfort. "I will watch your story." Surya would also get the qualification of the end one day. Then the day would come when we meet again. It wasn't here, but in the later scenarios of the star stream. And in a short moment, Surya's gaze turned towards the fragments of the destroyed train. They were fragments of the car where Surya and I faced each other. However, the appearance of some fragments was a bit strange. They weren't broken from the battle with me. They were scars carved on the train from before. "I know. That's right. You understand." Surya finally disappeared with these words. The pressure on the surroundings vanished and a curious silence took its place. I didn't feel it was real. I calmly practiced what I had planned and was lucky with several things. Then I came all this way. The 25th main scenario has ended. I turned my head and saw Yu Jonghyuk watching Surya's disappearance. The main scenario Demon King selection has been cleared. The rewards for the selection are being prepared. A new Demon King has appeared in the demon world. You have become the master of the 73rd demon realm. There was the explosive system message and Yu Jonghyuk and I simultaneously looked up at the sky. The gazes of countless beings poured towards me from the sky. The Demon King ruler of the East Hell is looking at you. The Demon King devil of principles is curious about you. The Demon King Black Mane Lion is inviting you to his demon realm. The constellation mass production maker is sending his congratulations. The constellation Queen of the Darkest Spring has sent you a gift. The constellation God of Wine and Ecstasy is proposing a toast. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is greatly pleased. The constellation Commander of the Red Cosmos is wary of you. It was an incomparable amount of attention. There were strong people similar to me to distant beings who I couldn't even look at their toes. There was a pause and then Jang Haeng's voice was heard. "It's over." I nodded and looked around. Lee Hyunsung carried Yong Hee-won while watching the sky. Lee Jae-hai supported the injured Yu Sanga and waved at me while Shin Yu-sung held onto my sleeve and looked up at me. The Breaking the Sky Master held the small OSU in her mouth and barked lightly. Han Myungo held Asmodeus' incarnation body in his arms and let out a weary breath. On the rocky hill not far away, I could see the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint and Kyrios. The injured Brash Swamp Predator was curled up and Cheok Jungyong was sitting on his back. It was an ordeal that couldn't be overcome without any of them. Your nebula is well known in the star stream. A large number of constellations remember the nebula Kim Dokja's company, temporary. Yu Jongyuk heard the message and frowned. The name needs to be changed. I smiled at the guy who had his pride in a strange place. It wouldn't be bad to brainstorm names for the nebula sooner or later. It felt that the darkness was retreating from the sky. I could breathe for a moment from the seemingly endless trials. Your first giant story is fully blooming. The giant story Demon World Spring has been acquired. Citizens started emerging from the ruined industrial complex. People were intoxicated by the unbelievable victory. Some people shouted, while others called out mine and Yu Jongyuk's names. I could also see Aileen and Mark. The star stream is satisfied with your giant story. You have earned the qualification of the end. Finally, there were the messages I had been waiting for. The hidden scenario, a single story, has begun. Your legendary stories has formed an opening act. The initial portion of your first giant story has been completed. After a long period of enduring, the first footstep towards the final scenario was taken. You have been given the authority of. The filtering is turned off. It was the moment when the information of the last chapter, which had long been covered with a veil, finally appeared in front of my eyes.